Support for Overheard with Evan Smith comes from Hilco Partners, a Texas government affairs consultancy, Claire and Carl Stewart, Christine and Philip Dial, and the Eller Group, specializing in crisis management, litigation, and public affairs communication. EllerGroup.com.
I'm Evan Smith. He's a six-time Grammy Award-winning singer-songwriter whose new album is Foxes in the Snow. He's Jason Isbell. This is Overheard.
A platform and a voice is a powerful thing.
You've really turned the conversation around about what leadership should be about.
Are we blowing this? Are we doing the thing we shouldn't be doing by giving in to the attention junkie? As an industry, we have an obligation to hold ourselves to the same standards that we hold everybody else to.
This is Overheard. Jason Isbell, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. Congratulations on the new record.
Thank you.
Can I fanboy for a second?
Yes, please.
I love this record.
Thank you.
You had me at you and a guitar.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Why this particular record and why now? The way you approached it and the timing of it. Why now?
You know, I felt like I don't want to keep doing different versions of the same thing. And that's a big challenge. I mean, I'm 46. I've been touring, making records for 25 years now. And a lot of what I've done over the last decade, for me personally, has worked. So it has. I've been able to figure out how to navigate the creative challenges of making records that I can live with, that I can be happy with. And the last album I did full band, Weather Vanes, I produced that myself, and you know, I felt like I did everything I wanted to do. I went in without any ego, without anything to prove, without needing to feel like I needed to give reasons why I was a producer and not just a recording artist or a songwriter. And so this time around, I wanted something very different, but I didn't want to be weird for the sake of being weird, you know? And usually for me, if I'm looking for a new creative challenge, I just go back to the song and then serve the song in the best possible way. So when I set out to write this record, I thought, well, what would make sense? What would be really, really difficult, but also possible, and would make the most sense at this point in my career?
Yeah, and so you stripped everything down.
Yeah, I just went into a studio with a guitar and a notebook and made a record. I didn't do any overdubs, anything like that. And you know, it was hard. It's hard to do. It's hard to sing and play at the same time. We forget with all this modern technology, you know. But it was very fulfilling for me. I feel like it was, at least from a personal standpoint, it was a success.
It's a beautiful record to listen to.
Thank you.
Do you care where people, speaking of listening to it, do you care where people listen to it? I'm always interested in interviewing musicians about the business of music. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I'm just curious to know where you come down. I listened to it on Spotify. Yeah. And then I felt guilty, and I bought it on Bandcamp.
Yeah.
I like this. I didn't want you not to have the money.
That is an acceptable. What I want is for everyone. I want everyone to give me money.
Yes. Okay.
So whatever
noted.
Yeah, whatever leads to that. I don't want to ask for it. I just want it to come in the mail.
How do you feel about that? Because obviously there have been fights between people like you and the apps and the streaming services. Are we getting enough for this? Or people basically just taking our stuff? And you know, I just wonder where you come down on that.
It's a long and nuanced conversation, but I will say that the way the system has been set up for a long time meant that you couldn't just plug in streaming capability and expect the artist and the songwriter to get a fair share. Right. Not necessarily because of the streaming, but because of the way the music business has been set up for a long time. I mean, it's not quite as regulated as some other industries, and big corporations, people with a lot of money, they've taken advantage of that for decades.
This is not new.
This is not new.
So do you think at all about this stuff?
I think a lot about this stuff. But I own my record label, and I get 2 checks from Spotify. I get one that goes to the record label and one that goes to the artist, and they're very different. The size of those checks.
So you actually can see the difference.
I can see the difference.
With your own eyes.
Yes.
So let's come back to the approach of this record. So I've read an interview with you in which you talked about why you approached it this way. You and your guitar. Not the 400 unit on this record. You and your guitar. One thing you said was, well, it's easier. Logistically, it's easier.
Yes.
I get to basically control the process. I don't have to work out the arrangements with my band. But you also said it was emotionally easier, and that gets to the second part. You
Yeah.
said there's a lot of heavy stuff on this record, and I didn't need the band to participate in that darkness.
Yes,
That's
yes.
what you said. Talk
It's
about
true.
that.
Yeah, I mean, it's all of the records that I do are personal. And one of my rules that I've always had as a songwriter is if something makes me feel uncomfortable, if I write a line in a song
Yeah.
and I feel uncomfortable about it, it has to stay in the song.
Yeah.
You know, and this is tough, but this is
It's
the job.
discipline, right?
Yes, but this is what
Yeah.
happens when you make your own job. When you create the job that you want, then you have to go by the rules, you
Yeah.
know? And so that's the discipline is what leads me to, I think, a point where I'm offering something that's a little bit different from what other songwriters might be offering.
Yeah.
So if I break those rules, then I'm doing a different job.
Right.
And I've been through a lot of changes in the last couple of years. You know, I went through a divorce. I've moved into a different place, and I started over in some ways and continued on in other ways.
Yeah.
And documenting that felt like something that that I wanted to do on my own in a way.
Yeah. Nobody else in the room.
Right, yeah, because I mean, my band will cry sometimes.
Right.
You know, I'll play a song for them the first time, and I'll look up and I'll be crying. I'll be like, I'm so sorry, you guys. You
Well,
know?
but you know, to be honest, there are, look, if you listen to this record, there are some really sad, moving, emotional songs on this record. No,
Yeah.
no question. It felt
Yeah.
like to me a therapy session. It felt
Yeah.
like a confessional. Felt a little bit like an explanation, not that you owed us one.
Yeah.
For what's happened over the last couple of years.
Right, and you know, and I'm close to my band. Like, we're friends.
Yeah.
We love each other. You
Yeah.
know, we hug, and they've seen my life change firsthand. We spent a lot of time together, play a lot of shows,
Right.
and you know, musically, their contributions are always welcomed and always necessary. And I feel like now that we're working these songs up as a full band,
Yeah.
it makes sense. But
Right.
but when I was going to go in there for the spark of creation, I feel like I needed to do
Yeah.
that alone, you know, with
Right.
just some microphones and a guitar.
So let me go there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's go there,
You
Evan.
talked about the divorce. You talked about the split from your wife, Amanda Shires, who was also a band member in the 400 unit.
Sort of. She
Sort
played
of.
with us when she wasn't touring,
Right,
and I went and
but
played
she
with
was
her.
kind of considers the 400 unit to have been one of her credits, right?
Yeah, I think so.
She played it.
Yeah.
The breakup seems to have been a driving force narratively on this record, right? Gravelweed, my favorite song on the record, right?
thanks,
Seems
yeah.
to be largely about that, is my listening to it.
Yeah.
There's a line in it. I'm sorry, the love songs all mean different things today.
Yes.
It's a sort of poetic line. It's a reflection on the relationship coming to an end and how you see that period of your life. How difficult is it for that to be I mean, this is personal for you, obviously. How
Yeah.
difficult is that for that to be the basis for your stuff?
For the work, you
Yeah.
mean?
I mean, you're just letting it all hang out there.
I don't have anything to compare it to, though.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always done that. I feel like if something's possible, it's hard for me to judge how difficult it is.
Yeah.
And I've always done that with my songs. I mean, when I first started writing,
This is not the most personal record you've done?
maybe, I don't know. That's just my job. That's the job that I
Yeah.
made for myself. So if you go back through the other albums, there's a lot of really personal, almost private things on those records.
Yeah.
I think the work that I want to do is to sit across the table from the version of myself that I might not be the most comfortable with, and be able to stay in the chair long enough to work that into something that is art. You know, that's not an easy gig.
But the
you know?
art is sort of for us. I'm wondering if for you, though, if the benefit of this is that you're working it out kind of as you go up here.
In some ways, you know, I think it's more of an exorcism than a therapy session, because you know, like I do actual therapy, and
It's not like this.
No,
No.
I just did that before I came over here, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
And
You may need it again when this is over. We'll
Oh,
see.
I'll need it again at least every week, if not more. But truthfully, it's about sharing an experience. It's
Yeah.
about documenting an experience, offering it up and saying, does anyone else feel this way?
Yeah.
And that's the most you're going to get out of any song. That's
Right.
the most Townes Van Zandt ever got out of a song, or Bob Dylan is,
Right.
this is my weird life. Do you understand it? You know, do you have any experience that is similar?
Yeah.
And if you get a yes, you are a successful songwriter.
Right.
And if you get a no, then you're lying to yourself and everybody else.
I'm interested in how you've always been an open book. Like all the interviews over the years you've done, you've talked about the breakup of your marriage and your new partner.
Yeah.
You've talked about, which we'll come to in a second, your sobriety,
Yeah.
which is now going 13 years, right? I mean, you've been very public about this stuff. That feels like that had to have been a deliberate decision on your part, because not everybody in your situation, hardly anybody in your situation, is as public about that stuff as you have been.
Yes. Well, I was an only child. That's
Yeah.
what. That's what.
Is that
that's
right?
what did it.
Nobody, you need
I was
somebody
so
to talk
used
to.
to
Is that what it
everybody
was?
listening to what I said.
Yeah, right.
But also, like a little over 13 years ago, I got sober, and
Yes.
the recovery process taught me a lot of stuff. And one of those things was, if you just go ahead and tell everybody the truth, it's not going to come back to haunt you later.
Yeah.
And that's tough. It's painful. It's painful, but I sleep good. You know, because there aren't any surprises. And I live by that. I don't know if that's the right move or not, but I think part of my version of the human experience is just really picking a strategy and sticking with it. I think that's about as good as I can do.
And being an open
That's
book
my
is your
strategy.
strategy.
It's like, here's who I am.
Right,
This
lay it
is
all out
how
there.
my life is. These
Yeah.
are why I make the decisions I make.
Right.
And at the very least, you're not going to get surprised when somebody finds something out about you.
Right, because it's already out
It's
there.
already out there. What are you
there,
going to
yeah.
do? You know.
How are you in the band? I wondered about that when I saw that this was a solo record. Then I
Yeah.
read a little bit and I was like, okay, he's taking a little bit of a detour to do this record
Yeah.
by himself. But you've had a little bit of change in the band, right?
Yes. Yes.
I'm shocked to see that you've been, the 400 Units first record, your first record with the band was 2009.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's been 16 years
Yes.
with this band. You were only in the Drive-By Truckers for 6.
That's right. Yeah.
But if I say to somebody, as I did this week while I'm going to interview Jason Isbell, they say, oh, the guy from the Drive-By Truckers.
Right.
You're still associated with a band that you only were in for like a third of the time.
I know.
almost, of the-
That's crazy.
Yeah.
It's
How
like,
is a relationship with this band?
You know, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie were married for 2 years.
And yet we still, right. And yet we're still Brangelina-ing,
Yes.
right? That's it. I
2
know.
years
Yeah.
out of all the years of the world.
Right. Just 2.
Just 2.
Just 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so talk to me about the 400 Unit and how you are with the band right now. How you feel about that?
Oh, we just hate each other's guts.
I bet.
Yeah. Every morning we get up and kick each other in the shins and go to work. No, you know, I love my band, and things change. Some people are better on the road than others. And the thing is, I've noticed this lately, is we're getting older. And that's pretty strange.
It is.
That's pretty strange because
Right.
it's like it takes a lot. You know, it used to be we would do so many shows, like 150 shows a year or something, and we would just be like pushing. And
Right.
we'd be tired, but we're always tired. We always felt terrible. We're in the van, we're going, we're doing the work. Now, you know, I realize that it's kind of a physical job.
Yep.
And you have to take into consideration, people have families, people have spouses, people have other things they want to do with their time, and it makes sense. So you have to navigate.
Well, we
those
were
things.
talking before we came out here. You have a 9-year-old daughter.
I have a 9-year-old daughter.
And the
yeah.
thing about being on the road all this time is you don't get that time back,
That's true.
right? Let me talk to you about getting sober, because this is a big narrative through line in your story.
Yeah.
And you talk about it all the time. It'd be a little weird to talk about it if you didn't talk about it all the time, but you're holding the door open.
Right.
I'm going to walk through.
Right.
What happened?
What happened?
What happened?
I drank my allotted amount of alcohol,
Yeah.
and I just
Did you
I
know?
just
Did
did
you
it
know that
quickly.
did you know you had a problem?
I mean, at a certain point, yes. You know, at first, I didn't know I had a problem. The thing is, it wasn't just knowing that I had a problem. It's knowing that I had a lot of problems.
Right.
And, you know, drinking allowed me to postpone dealing with those things.
Yeah.
And that was nice for a long time. And
Yeah.
then, you know, if you don't deal with your emotions, they will deal with you. And so eventually it was just a matter of,
Right.
you know, eventually I'm going to have to feel something. But yeah, toward the end, I certainly realized I drink way too much, and I don't think I can stop on my own.
Yeah, and you've talked about how during the period of time you were in the drive-by truckers, this was really a problem. And,
Yes.
And there are parts of it that you're kind of a little bit hazy on, right? During
Yeah,
during
I mean,
those years.
I remember most of it. But, you know, having a drinking problem in the drive-by truckers at that time,
Yeah.
you know, it was sort of like having a caddy on the PGA Tour. You know, it kind of was part of the deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I just was very young and
Yeah.
probably, you know, drank more than everybody else in the group and had some problems.
Look
with
at what has happened though since. I mean, you've that said 13 years.
it turned out to be a very good idea.
Yeah. I was interested when you talked about this record, when you have talked about this record, that you've said I made decisions kind of in my life in the last couple of years that maybe not everybody would have made.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you've been a drinker and then you are sober, you have to make decisions to solve for not becoming unsober. I think the
Yes.
way you said it was, the risk of relapse is a train.
Yeah.
And if you see the train coming from far enough off, you know to get off the tracks.
Yep.
If you don't see the train coming and it's too late, it's an effing train.
Yes,
That's, I think, exactly
that's
what
what
you
I said.
said,
Yeah.
right? And,
Yeah.
and that's a really interesting way to think about it. Like, you're always solving for this. That's why they say recovering, not X.
Yes, exactly, right.
Right.
And not like, you know, they don't say I used to be an alcoholic or an addict. They say I am.
Right.
You know, but yeah, it's that. I mean, it's tough, but it seems to work best for me.
Yeah.
You know, I just won't let things continue if I feel like they need to change. I'm not the kind of person who thinks, you know, time is going to solve everything, and if I just keep on going the way I'm going, it's going to be fine. I won't do that. And I'm very, very privileged to be able to make those decisions.
Right.
You know,
Not
these
everybody can.
Not everybody can. Some
Yeah.
people are trying to get fed, trying to get rent paid, trying to get, you know, their
Right.
family taken care of,
Right.
and they don't have time to sit and think what's going to make me happy 10 years from
Yeah.
now.
Well, in the same way that the truckers are part of your brand these days, even though it's been a while, the
Yeah.
fact that you're sober is also part of your brand.
It
And that's
is.
partly because you've done that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people admire you for how you've
It helped
you've
me.
lived your life.
It helped
Right.
me, you know, being accountable in that way helped me because you know, there's so many people I would let down if I relapsed, if I had another drink,
Yeah.
and that's not necessarily the first line of defense, but it might be the last one. You
Yeah, I
know,
get it.
if I'm in the process of reaching for a glass of whiskey, I think, I don't know, man, the fingers are going to hate this. Well, I'll put it back down and slide it over.
By the way, that's water.
You know, that is water. This
So-
is water, but there's
so
really
we're-
water
so
in
we're
there,
clear.
so that's
There is,
good.
that's
Yeah.
good. Yeah. We have some minutes.
Overserved with Evan Smith.
Smith. Well, that's. I like that. That could be the podcast.
Yeah,
actually.
that's the podcast.
after
Yeah,
the show.
everybody's in their pajamas.
That's exactly right. We have a couple of minutes. I want to talk about your experience growing up. You were born in Green Hill, Alabama.
Yep.
You were in a family where music was a constant, right? People in your family, grandfather, uncles, played instruments, and you learned at a young age. I think you played the mandolin at 6.
Yeah,
you learned how to
6,
play the
7
mandolin
years
at 6.
old. Yeah, yeah.
And you were in bands as a kid growing up?
Yep, I was in a bunch of garage bands and country bands. And
What were
stuff.
the names of some of these bands? I'm always curious about that.
Let's see, we had a band called Lieutenant Dan, and because you know Forrest Gump was from Alabama.
I was about to say,
so
Forrest
it's
Gump,
like
good
a
Forrest Gump
southern-
joke. That's
yeah,
excellent.
Yeah,
Right, yeah.
And then we had one called Young Country. This was kind of a successful act.
Yeah.
We won some like battles of the bands, and we got to play at some venues in Nashville and stuff. And then our lead singer, there was a girl that sang for us. She punched her boyfriend and broke her finger, and so she was in a cast. So she was holding her microphone, but her pinky was in the
just straight
cast,
up, right?
pointing straight up. Yeah, and so she had to sing like this, and then she got pregnant, and the band just sort of dissolved.
Life happens.
But life happens.
Yeah.
But that was me and my best friend Chris Tompkins were in that band, and I was like 15, 16. He was a year older, and he didn't like to tour. He didn't like to play live, and now he's written I think 17 #1 country songs.
Is that so?
Yeah, he moved to Nashville years before I did. He wrote Before He Cheats for Carrie Underwood, and then just a whole string of hits after that.
Hasn't written for you.
He's not. We've written together. We wrote a song together that was on a Highwomen album. Me and him and Amanda wrote If She Ever Leaves Me for the Highwomen record. The three of us wrote that together. Yeah, and we've written songs together, but it's a very different approach.
Yeah.
He calls what I do artsy.
Well,
You know?
I mean, in fairness,
Yeah, and it's like
it is sort of, right?
It is like Rick Hall, who was the famous record producer from Muscle Shoals, where I got my start. First
Right.
person to pay me to work in the music business. I remember him coming into the studio while a few folks were making a more independent sounding record, and he come in and he said, "This must be nice. I remember when we had to record hits." You know?
Sick burn.
Yeah.
Right? Yes.
Yeah, but it's that kind of thing. Like, it's a different. Chris
Right.
sits down in a room with people and they're trying to make a hit, you know, and I sit there. I'm trying to make people cry. It's a different gig.
Different deal.
Yeah.
Did you play the Grand Ole Opry at some point in your teen?
Yes,
years?
we did. We did the Opry with that band.
You and
I was,
Chris?
and I think
Yeah.
I was 15. And this was part of, you remember Jimmy Dean,
Yeah.
singer? And he had the sausage.
Sausages, yeah.
It's pretty good sausage.
Most people remember the sausage.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yes. That's funny how, you know, the sausage probably lasted 2 years in his
Yeah,
singing
exactly.
career. But he had this thing at the Ryman where if you won a couple of like regional Battle of the Band contests,
Right.
you could perform there as part of his showcase. And we did that. And then we played at the place that used to be the Wild Horse Saloon in downtown Nashville. Opened for Radney Foster, Texan songwriter, wonderful
right, of course.
songwriter,
He's
Radney
great.
Foster. Yeah, so we played some pretty big gigs. I had a cowboy hat and a bolo tie. It was legit.
Different time.
It was a different time. Yeah, it wasn't quite as cool to have a cowboy hat and this was pre-Malone, so you.
So,
you know,
so
you couldn't really, like-
did you, in that time, how you got connected with the Drive-By Truckers initially, I think, was through the dad of one of the people in the band?
Patterson's dad, David Hood, bass player from the Swampers, Muscle Shoals rhythm section. And I would go around, me and Chris and Chad, my drummer now, and a bunch of our friends, we would go around to all the restaurants and bars and venues and listen to these guys play when we were kids, and they would get us up to sit in, and we got to be friends with them. And then I met Patterson through that, because Patterson had moved out of town.
Right.
He made, kind of punk music, and so there wasn't really a place for him in North Alabama at that time.
right.
Yeah. And so he moved to College Town, to Athens, Georgia, and started his band there. And then when he would come back to visit and stay with his dad or with his dad's friends or whatever, we got introduced to each other that way and hit it off really quickly.
Yeah. So Drive-By Truckers is 2001 to 2007. We said 400 unit becomes part of your deal in 2009.
Mm-hmm.
I want to fact check this. The 400 unit is the name of the psych ward at a hospital in Florence, Alabama.
Yeah, it was. I
Was.
think they've changed it now, which is probably my fault.
So your
but-
band is named for the psych ward.
Yes. Well,
Right.
we pull it. You know, we pull into town, and I would give everybody their per diem. You know, at
Right.
$10, and we'd get out of the van, and we would go get lunch, and scare the locals pretty badly,
Right.
and say some really inappropriate things, and we were harmless. But they were terrified
still.
of us. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'd try to get a sandwich without getting arrested, get back in the van and go to the next town. And I remember after seeing that a couple of times, I was like, you know what this reminds me of? On Wednesdays, the 400 unit will bring everyone down in the van, and they'll give them a name tag and $10, and they'll go out and they'll get a sandwich.
So this is just like that.
It's just like that.
Right.
Yeah. And, I mean, I guess it's a little insensitive now, but they did have me back.
We'll edit that out in post.
Yeah.
That's fine. Yeah.
But they did have me back to judge the talent show at the 400
At the
unit.
hospital?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And so some of them were really great.
Well, they're in on the joke. I guess, right?
Yeah. Some of them were really, really, really good. Some of them were not, but some of them
Good.
were. Yeah.
Before we go, what are you listening to? What should we be listening to?
I like the new Bon Iver record. Will Johnson from my rock and roll band has put out a record. He's a Texan gentleman, and he put out a record today, actually. Will Johnson, his 10th solo record. He's been making music since the early 90s.
So
and-
not only can you put out solo records, but so can other people. it
Yeah, a
turns
lot
out,
of,
right?
a lot of members of my band have done that. Sadler's done it, Anna Butters has done it, Will's done it many times. Will's record is out. It's very, very good.
Yeah.
Let's see, what else? I love Waxahachie, Katie Crutchfield.
Right.
I think she's really,
Yeah,
really good.
I got to say, +1. She's great.
She's really, really good.
She is great.
And also, I got a 9-year-old daughter, so I am very familiar with the top 10 right now.
I am not. So
very
anything
familiar.
you say, I'll just be like nodding along. That's
I
fine.
like the Gracie Abrams record. I like the Tate McRae record. I think it's really good pop
Yeah.
music. My daughter is tired of me listening to Charlie XCX over and over and over and over.
Really?
Yeah. But I think it's good. The other day, actually, she said, "Dad, I think we should start listening to some of the male singers on the pop stations, because I have some friends who are boys, and up until now I've always just said, let's skip that, So now I've learned that Benson Boone has some pretty good songs. Teddy Swims is pretty good.
Yeah.
I just put it on the pop music, drive her to school, and then after I drop her off, I'm like, this is putting me in a pretty good mood.
Not the worst stuff. Not the worst stuff in the world.
Not the worst. I love Lisa. I'm a huge
Are you?
huge fan of Lisa from Blackpink. I love Lisa.
That's great.
Yep.
Thank you for making time to be here.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you for
Congratulations on
having
the
me.
record, and good luck with everything.
Thank you
Jason
so much.
Isbell, thank you. All right, good. Thanks.
We'd love to have you join us in the studio. Visit our website at austinpbs.org/overheard to find invitations to interviews, Q&As with our audience and guests, and an archive of past episodes.
I was fortunate to be raised by people who weren't hateful, and that, I think, did everything for me. Gave me that kind of perspective, and they didn't prejudge people based on skin color or sexual preference, or they just weren't hateful people.
Support for Overheard with Evan Smith comes from Hilco Partners, a Texas government affairs consultancy, Claire and Carl Stewart, Christine and Philip Dial, and the Eller Group, specializing in crisis management, litigation, and public affairs communication. ellergroup.com.